And thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. We are still attempting to break down what is happening with the haircuts for you, the debt exchange, which is an appropriate technical term for you. We've examined it in many, many ways. But tonight, what we want to do is taking a cue from something that the Deputy Finance Minister told us when he was here on Monday. He says that the debt exchange program alone will not fix our debt crisis. It won't. The other bit that will help is fiscal discipline, fiscal measures that have been introduced, the cut in expenditure and others. That together will deliver a healthy economy in the medium to long term. So we've exhausted and looked at the debt exchange. Of course, we are waiting to see what the external debt exchange program, or even if that's, assuming that's the approach they take, will also look like. So we'll put that aside for now, and we may return to that subsequently. But tonight, I want to focus on that second bit, on government afro as against the people's haircut. The people will take a haircut. As we now know, it is inevitable. But what is government doing to its afro? And government itself will admit that it has an afro. And that's why when I go through my presentation, you will see that they have also attempted to propose some cuts to their afro, government afro. But the question we need to ask tonight and attempt to answer is government afro cut enough compared to the people's haircut that government is imposing? That's the question we want to answer by the time I finish my presentation. So let's start by looking at what the basic fundamentals are when it comes to debt exchange, which is the people's haircut, right? So all bondholders, institutional bondholders, will have to exchange their bonds for new ones, right? Which it is going to have the ultimate implied and effective outcome of that is a haircut on your interest. So as it stands now, you are going to receive a 0% interest in 2023, which is a haircut, 5% only interest for the institutional bondholders, including banks, pension funds, insurance firms, etc., 5% in the 2024, and then 10% in 2025 till maturity. This is assuming you still are waking up and don't know what's happening in the last few days. So that's the basis, and that's the haircut that government is imposing on you. So then government says, well, we are doing that. We are asking you to take that significant haircut, right? So we need to also meet you halfway. So in the 2023 budget, government then presents additional measures to trim down its afro, right? So what did government propose to do to trim down their afro? 50% cuts in full allocations to public political appointees is one of them. A ban on the use of V8s and V6s or equivalent except in cross-country. Then there was limited budget allocations for purchase of vehicles as well, which was put up. We put a 3 question marks there. When you say limited budget allocation for purchase of vehicles, what exactly is that? The overriding common theme you see, it is a vagueness of the afro cuts. Because the afro cuts do not put numbers to the cuts. But when you go to the people's haircut numbers, it is tangible, right? Because when they say 0% tangible, 5% tangible, 10% tangible, you can touch the people's haircut. But why can't you not touch the government's afro cut? It's a very fair question to ask. Because look at them, 50% cut in full allocation. Yeah, you can touch that. Ban on the use of V8s. Who is monitoring that? Who is monitoring that? I mean, even a 50% cut in full allocation to political appointees, who is monitoring to ensure that this actually is happening? But when I say you can't touch it, it's not tangible enough, how much is this saving us exactly? 50% means nothing unless you can put a proper real value to it. That's what I maintain. Because when you look at the people's cut, the people's haircut, it is saving this economy in terms of debt servicing and the debt burden 137 billion cedis. So hard number. You can't get it wrong. But 50%, how much is it that the government afro is saving us when they cut 50% in terms of allocation for? We don't know. So that is one of the key differences in the way the government is treating its afro and how they're treating the people's haircut. And then you come to limited budget. Then you come to only essential official foreign travel across government, including SOE, shall be allowed. Only essential. Okay, so who defines what is essential and what is not? The few ministers that we saw post the budget, because this was in the budget, who traveled to Qatar to go and watch the Black Stars, was that an essential official foreign travel? It's a question we don't know. Maybe they went on their own volition, they used their own monies to buy the tickets, and this is on their own budget. So maybe, yeah, that didn't qualify. They're not using the taxpayers' money, so they didn't need to go through this sort of approval process. But those are fundamental, relevant questions that we need to ask. And there was more. Government-sponsored external training for officials also going to be cut, reduction of expenditure on appointments, suspension of housing utilities, and all non-government agencies will not be established in 2023, reduction in the size of convoys. These are good, but are they enough? And remember the discrepancy in the treatment of the people's haircuts and the government's afro cut is that these ones hard to quantify what they are delivering in terms of real value to you, but in the people's haircut, you can't quantify. Here it is. For the people's haircut, hard numbers, 137. And we did this calculation for you yesterday by ourselves, because then if you look at our total debt stock, this people's haircut will deliver 29.31% reduction in the total public debt. So the people's haircut clearly is going to deliver some significant huge benefits to us that you can quantify. So what percentage reduction in the public debt stock will the government afro cut deliver? I don't know. Maybe my guest can help us. But then this is the big question. Is government doing enough? Okay, let's try and answer that question. We start answering this question by looking at the budget. Okay? Now, if you look at the budget, total budget allocation for this year, for what the entire, allocations, total expenditure allocations. This is one, I want to compare last year to 2023, the coming year in the budget. Then that gives a sense. 145 billion is what the total allocations were for this year in the 2022 budget. In the 2023 budget, the allocation has shot up to 227.81 billion. The key question to ask, you are in a crisis of unprecedented proportions and you are proposing to spend more year on year. That must immediately raise questions. Because you know what the problem we are in right now? We are spending way beyond our means. We are spending money we don't have. So when you have a situation like this, all you need to do is to begin to spend less than you actually earn. So you're expecting at least to be, this shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't have an expansionary budget in a time of great austerity and an economic crisis. But just looking at this figure alone tells you maybe the answer to this question is leading to suggestions that maybe the government's afro cut isn't enough. But we did a bit more breakdown. And for me, this is the fascinating bit of this. Now, look at some of the key allocations. We found one great positive in the allocations to the government flagship programs and to the Office of Government Machinery. There's a positive there because in 2022, there was a 3.1 billion allocation to Office of Government Machinery. All the staff in the presidency, those huge numbers of presidential staffers, they were taken from this, huge, 3 billion. But in 2023, because of austerity, we've reduced it to 1.4 billion. So that is good. And so you see a 1.7 billion CD decrease, right, in how much we're proposing to spend on the president and his office. So that is good. However, if you're in a crisis, do you still maintain your flagship programs and spend more on them The argument, if you read the IMF-owned Q&A document, is to suggest that you have to look at this and review to make it more efficient, more cost-effective, and value for money. But yet, we have a situation where in 2022, for free SHS, government budgeted 2.3 billion. In 2023, in this austere year of unprecedented proportions, no year can compare to this in our history. You are proposing to spend more. You are proposing to spend 660 million cedis more on free SHS. The finance minister, when he delivered the address recently, said they will review it. But if you're reviewing it, you should review it to show that you have austerity. That's the show that. The jury's out on that. Then you have planting of food and jobs. It used 630 million was what was allocated to it last year. 700 million is what is allocated to it now. Again, 70 million cedis increase in that. PFJ. One district, one factory. 260 million last year. Again, an increase of 90 million this year. These are great social interventions. But these are not normal times. These are not, you can't be expanding them in this year, right? So that is one of the key things we looked at. And then the big one I found, which others have suggested, that raises a lot more eyebrow. In an austere year, in a crisis year of unprecedented proportions, never seen before, apocalyptic circumstances, you have located 80 million to a vanity project like the National Cathedral. But let me give you other statistics to compare what this could have done to a struggling, dying economy. Compared to the student loan trust, I told you that free SHS is good because obviously it's helping people. But student loan trust, that will help your students go to school and fund themselves. I went to school, tertiary, relying on student loan trust. They got 3 million. National Cathedral, vanity project, 80 million. If you go to plastic waste recycling, for a country that is big now on climate change, we went to COP27, 2.4 million. If you look at Green Ghana project, another great investment that will bring us, if you look at the climate finance, billions of dollars, you're spending only 2.5 million there, but giving 80 million to a vanity project to build a cathedral. Now, for me, this one is a big one. Water sanitation initiative for a president who says, I want to make Accra the cleanest city in Africa. He is allocating 74.48 million cedis to water and sanitation initiatives, but allocating 80 million to a vanity cathedral construction. I mean, you need to, these are hard facts. These are all pretty much hard facts that on the face of it tells his own story. I mean, in terms of priority, a vanity project against water and sanitation that will save lives. So that tells a story. But this is not all, by the way. This is not all. I want to also go to the Constitution and look at the size of government, because many of you have said, cut the size of government. So we said, let's look at that. How much saving can we make if we cut the size of government? And we are looking not at the number of ministers, but at the number of ministries. So we start with the basic assumption in the Constitution. And if you look at Article 76, it says cabinet ministers, the core team of ministers and ministries you need to run a government. The Constitution specifies it. Anything above that is superfluous. You can choose it. The Constitution won't limit you. But it says you cannot have something, as far as cabinet is concerned, the most critical ministries, between 10 and 19, right? But currently, so which means that the framers of the Constitution didn't set this limit for its sake. They did it because they knew we can run a whole government in a small, tiny country of 30 million people with 19 ministries. But we have 28 ministries. So it's bigger than we can run it, right? I'll tell you why we can run it very shortly, but stay with me. Assuming we work with the Constitution, and why should we? Because we are President himself said it, we are in crisis. When you're in crisis, you take extraordinary measures. You reduce, you cut drastically. You're asking the people to take 137 billion cedis off your debt. That is extraordinary. What is extraordinary is when the government also reduces it to 19 ministries. If you did that, right? If you take the allocation to all the 28 ministries we have now, it is 72 billion. If you did 19, it brings it down to 66.9 billion. How much are you saving? You're saving 5.8 billion if you run it just with the 19 ministries. And I'm going to show you that you can run this government with 19 ministries. You come down to what? 5.8 billion. Now, let me even surprise you more. Let's go back to the people's haircut. SNIT is exposed. SNIT is exposed to the people's haircut. The people's pension fund sitting at SNIT. They're exposed to the bond haircut that they will receive, right? We found that this amount, this saving that you are going to make, if you reduce it to 19, could service the domestic debt of SNIT, insurance companies, standard loans, and you even have a balance of 3.8 billion. What it means is you pay off SNIT's, you don't have to hold SNIT's bonds and give a haircut to it. You don't have to hold the insurance company's bonds and give a haircut to it. You simply make the saving, pay them off, and you still have money. The people's haircut will not be as santo as it's 137 if you reduce to 19. Let me explain. This, according to the finance ministry themselves, right? SNIT's exposure to government bonds, according to finance ministry data, is 540 million. The insurance companies, 1.1 billion. The insurance companies, 1 billion. Standard loans, 380 million exposure, right? And these are the percentages. Together, it is just over 2 billion cedis. But what government has set down with the debt exchange is that all those pensions that we paid to SNIT, and they've used they've used 540 of that to buy government bonds, will now take a haircut on their interest, as you know, I've explained at the beginning already. But if you do this cut in the ministries, you save that amount, that will have to just clear off that debt. You pay SNIT, you don't have to hold SNIT's, the pension funds people hold in SNIT that they've used to buy bonds, you clear that. You clear for insurance companies as well. And they've been meeting all week trying to see how they can respond to the government debt exchange because it will affect your premiums you're paying to the insurance companies. But government can save so much to clear all this. What would that mean? You exempt SNIT from the haircut. You exempt insurance companies from the haircut. You exempt standard loans from the haircut if you reduce your ministers to only the cabinet ministers. So the question, can you run this country on 19 ministries? Yes, you can. Ghana's population, 30 million. United Kingdom of 67 million. Do you know how many ministries they have? 23. So can you run this country with 19 ministers? Yes, you can. United States of America. Do you know how many cabinet ministers they have for a population of 332 million? 19 cabinet ministers. Ours, for 30 million, is 19 ministers. So can you run it on 19? Absolutely yes. Because you have so many other agencies who can do the actual job. Why do you have a fisheries ministry and an agri ministry? Why? Why? So that is the question. I don't know what your conclusions are, but you've seen the data and what it suggests. My guests are joining me. Professor Bokwing is my guest tonight. And let me ask him one quick question and the others. Give me a quick reaction to this question. They give me a quick reaction. I'll take a break after that, and then we'll come and expand on the basis of what I've done. Prof. Bokwing, thank you for joining me. I need to ask you, also joining me tonight, by the way, is Franklin Kujo, a good friend of mine. And then one of the unions who also joining me, and they've also issued a statement saying they reject the debt exchange, is the Ghana Medical Association. So Frank Sirbo is the president, who also joined me. Three of them joining us tonight. We'll answer the first question, the government's afro and the people's haircut. What can be done to the government's afro when we return from this? Stay with me. Frank Sirbo is the president of the Ghana Medical Association, joins us on the telephone line. Why have I invited him? Well, he represents the doctors, and they've issued a statement yesterday and saying that they are worried about their pension funds, and so they are going to reject the debt exchange program. So he is in the thick of it. I want to hear his thoughts. Franklin Kojo, founding president and CEO, Imani Center for Policy and Education. And of course, he's been writing a lot about both the size of government, etc. They've done a lot of work in this area. So I want to tap into that. And then, of course, you know Professor Godfred Bokwe, economist and associate professor of finance, University of Ghana Business School, also joins us. I want to start with Dr. Frank Cerebro. Doc, yesterday I listened to your General Secretary Titus with me on Top Story, and he said that they haven't seen enough of government cutting its afro, and that possibly, if that happens, will signal that government is serious enough. And then maybe you can begin to consider the haircuts that government is imposing possibly on your pension funds. Do I get a sense that that is one condition for at least considering the offer on the table to exchange the bonds?
Evans, let me say good evening to you, and then, of course, good evening to your viewers and listeners. I believe that pensions are supposed to be sacred, and I have said that pensions in this country already is very bad, and if we are going to touch pensions of anyone, that is criminal. So I think that we should not even be talking about the government cutting its the size of the government or looking at its afro and then coming to touch pensions. The bottom line is that we don't think that anybody should touch pensions at all. And I will explain as we go along. And so the position is that it is not negotiable. We don't think that pensions should be used as a bargaining chip, and that pensions should be left to stand as it is.
I mean, Professor Bokwe, to that big subject, how much of a difference do you think it will make if government decides to cut even further? To start with, do you agree with the going assumption that government hasn't cut its afro enough?
Yeah, thank you very much, Evans. Good evening to your viewers. Good evening to co-panelists. I think if you survey the markets, you come to the conclusion that government isn't doing enough. Government doesn't want to take any serious haircuts. Government is of the posture that we can pass on this through the system. And that is unfortunate. From where I sit, some level of debt operation would have to be done. Would have to be done because of the extent of the crisis. We are in a deep debt distress category. To crawl back to a sustainable debt level, a combination of fiscal adjustment, debt operation, and other interventions will be critical. We are unable to side with government now because government hasn't done enough on its parts. And that is why asking the financial system instruments to bear the brunt makes it a bit disproportionate. Whilst we were anticipating that some kind of restructuring is unavoidable, I think the proposal government has put forward is too drastic and steep. I can't imagine that people sat down and conceptualized something like this and say that we are going to implement it. This is the MPP that believes in the private sector. This is a country that says that the private sector is the engine of growth. I mean, it's worrying. I'm saying it's worrying because Evans, without even applying debt operation, if you mark to market government financial instruments in the books of banks today, is translating to income losses. For some of them, under Basel II risk-based capital prescription, they may have to bring additional capital. If you look at the exchange rate losses, look, a couple of years ago, we said, let's increase the minimum capital requirement to 400 million cedis. Yeah. If you look at that today, in today's exchange rate, that's worth very little in dollar terms. If you want to make the banking sector robust to support economic growth, then we should be looking at the next 3 years or so, recapitalizing banks all over again. So I am thinking that, and I read that the Financial Stability Council is thinking of setting up a fund.
Yeah, Financial Stability Fund.
Well, if that was their conclusion, they should rather give the money to government. Why do you want to weaken the balance sheet of banks and later go and set up 15 billion to help them? If they could mobilize the 15 billion, let them give it to government. The government balance sheet that has deteriorated. Okay, why are we doing these things to ourselves?
Yeah, I mean,
you know, the pain would have been, it would have been easier to manage the pain if government had internalized the austerity, leadership by example.
Yeah, and Prof, I'll come to you and ask, so where else can government cut beyond what they have already told us in the 2023 budget? Let me bring in Franklin Kujo. Franklin, I read somewhere, in fact, I'm on my Joy Online, that you possibly have received 100,000 CD haircut already. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, I mean, as a participant in the EDC's investment fund, I've forgotten the name they give it, but the unit fund, I think, I realized upon receiving my statement that the mark-to-market value obviously had put me 100,000 CD less. I mean, this is investment over a number of years. And so when I saw that, even though I understood the times in which we are, I was quite mortified, and more so because as we speak, this is the current situation. Assuming I was going to take that money, I was going to get that amount of haircuts. But I'm even told that if I decide to take the money today, two things. Either I might not necessarily get the money in record time, and then secondly, because these sums, however depressed, are already due for the debt exchange program, it will mean that there may be some delays, or essentially saying that I may not get the full value of my money. And if I press further, it could actually be halved and possibly decimated as we go along. So that's the situation in which we are, and which leads me to why we're having this conversation. And I know you're asking questions as to why the government is asking us to tighten our belts, but then they are interested in loosening theirs. And that's quite worrying. I just want to point out, though, that you mentioned earlier that the OGM, Office of Government Machinery's budget, seems to have been slashed by probably, more $1 billion and over, right?
Yes.
I'm not too sure. I think it's just reduced by close to about 300 to 350,000 Ghana cedis. Because if you take a look at Appendix 194, where the expenditure allocation for 2023 is, forget the OGM has a number of agencies there as well, and probably you should take a second look at it. It comes close to about 2.6 billion Ghana cedis actually. So they haven't done us any favors by that small reduction. And the other worrying fact is that we could compare this crisis situation to the year 1995 when we had Kumi Preku, right?
Yeah.
Now, you expected at the time, the government at the time responded to the times and decided that, in fact, they had actually projected a fiscal surplus out of about $870 million that was to be generated. The government planned spending $800 million at the time. Here you are in a similar situation. You are spending, in fact, you are planning to raise close to 145 billion, and you're going to spend almost 205 billion. If you add amortization, that takes you to 227 billion. I don't think one can call this someone who is quite serious or being serious about the whole enterprise of austerity, really. And so for me, I worry strongly when I see these, those baby steps that were announced, the cuts in fuel and all those allocations that are supposed to be cut. They don't go deep enough. This is not a time we should be talking about. In fact, I expected the president to say, look, there will be no more earth crusher going forward as a symbol of exactly what times we currently are in. If you're talking about cut, there are so many areas that could be cut. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into those.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come to that and expand a bit on the cuts, and I'll start with you, Prof. But let me go to Frank. Frank, so your position, and going into this, you said the pension fund should not be touched. That is not negotiable. But we are where we are, and as the Prof has indicated, we need some form of debt treatment is inevitable. So is this something that you are willing? Today I heard from the Chamber of Corporate Trustees, who also represent the pension funds. And they said they've written to the finance minister today, in which they have softened their stance from exempt pension funds to we want to negotiate a better debt exchange program, a better offer. That is admitting that we can't do without some form of a hit. What do you say about that approach?
Well, let me indicate that, of course, even before these pensions issues were involved in this debt restructuring process, I think stakeholders were supposed to have been engaged. And you all know in this country that nobody was engaged. It was more of an imposition. And essentially, government just decided to do it on his own, even without recourse to the advice given to the government by Attorney General's department. And clearly, we all know we are in trouble. And I'm sure all the panel members have alluded to the fact that we are in crisis. However, government has not shown enough that we are in crisis. And so it becomes very difficult, for example, to start these kind of haircuts. In fact, I think that is more of a decapitation and not just a haircut.
Well, a decapitation, not a haircut.
Precisely. Precisely. Because, listen, Evans, pensions in this country is very bad. And if you look at what is happening, and if you take a look at the budget itself, we are told that the CD has depreciated almost about 53%. Essentially, if you have 1,000 Ghana cedis currently, what you have actually in terms of value is less 53%. And so if you look at our pensions that are already suffering, and we are going to go through this process of debt restructuring, with even in terms of bonds yielding 0 percentage points come 2023, and then 5% 2024, and then 10%, and so forth and so on. It is quite troubling. I am very surprised that suddenly the Ghana Chamber of Corporate Trustees are changing their singing tone, because the letter that they sent to us as a union clearly indicated that they don't subscribe to what the government is doing, and they reject it in totality. And I think that that earlier position is what we should hold. And from what that we have heard this evening, even the cathedral, but tell me, what is it about the cathedral that we cannot decide that we can't have to do away with it for the meantime? What is it about it? What is it about the size of government that we can't do anything about it? My own ministry, which is the Ministry of Health, as we speak, 3 ministers, that is a substantive minister and 2 deputies. Is there no way we can cut? So essentially, government has not shown that we are in crisis. It is business as usual. And if you look at the budget, like you indicated, everything else is increasing, except the fact that the things that are supposed to affect workers and other citizens of Ghana, that is, they are very, very happy to cut those things. Government flagship programs, none of them has been affected. So essentially, we don't think that this is the time to use pensions as a leverage. Pensions at this time, clearly, when government has not demonstrated the fact that we are in trouble. Clearly, we are not in trouble as far as we are concerned. So why come and touch pensions? And so, Evans, I beg to differ from the position held by the Chamber of Corporate Trustees at the moment, as you are announcing to me, that they are willing to negotiate. I think the position should be clear. In fact, we should not be calling for negotiations. Ideally, he should have been the finance minister. And I have said on several platforms that he doesn't respect anyone. That is the reason why he did what he's done. Otherwise, how can you take this decision without involving the stakeholders and actually sitting at the table with them to at least pick their brains and find out how best we can resolve these issues and at least help this country? So I don't subscribe to that. I think that Ghana Medical Association stands by its position that we don't accept this, and I'm sure that the other labor unions would hold the same view as I'm holding this evening.
I mean, well, Professor Bokpin, you said government hasn't cut enough. What else can they cut? They've already announced a lot in the budget.
Well, we don't need this number of ministers to govern. We don't. There's considerable room for us to cut. You know, we need a serious downsize and a serious reform of our governance architecture since 1992. If you look at the way we have operationalized our democracy, it's too expensive, and the public sector balance sheet can no longer sustain that. So what is happening right now is that we've seen how the abuse of our tax revenue is no longer enough, and now they are touching pensions. So if we don't take advantage of the current crisis and initiate certain governance and productivity enhancing reforms, a time will come they would have touched pension, and all that will be left will be selling Ghanaians in order to raise some money to solve our problem. That's what we are heading towards. Okay. Now, if you look at what inflation has done to us, exchange rate and the rest of them, and if you look at the level of taxes, because the fiscal consolidation is heavy on revenue side and lean on the expenditure side, and that again is going to take so much from corporate Ghana and individuals. If you put all of this together, you see a certain trend where the country is heading towards in creating a financially repressed society. Even so much to the extent that people's pension are being mentioned today. I mean, that's very serious. Okay, in as much as we all agree that some level of debt treatment is unavoidable, I think the approach the Minister of Finance has adopted itself is problematic. Okay, it's problematic, and you don't surprise the market. This is not governance. This is not governance. You know, you are looking at creating confidence in the market to the extent that, and I want to make this suggestion that the ministry should be open to counter proposal. This is how nations are governed. It should not be like, take it or leave it, you're on your own. That is inconsistent with proper governance. That is inconsistent with building confidence. Okay, so and they must be open to the extent that in addition to the regulatory bodies, Bank of Ghana, Securities and Exchange Commission, the rest of them, they must equally be open to alternative assessment from the banking sector, from the insurance, from the pension, and the rest of them. That is because at the end of the day, we must be looking at coming out of this together in a much stronger way. But unfortunately, if you look at the announcement and the pronouncement and all of that, it's a bit worrying. So, and you can see the approach government is adopting, right? Because for the domestic debt, it is viewed as low-hanging fruit because they can use regulatory coercion to bring them to compliance, right? But you should just know that all these things will have implication for the stability of the financial sector, will have implication for growth, and that is unfortunate. Look, we have said this before, that Cote d'Ivoire reduced the number of ministers from 41 to 32. These ministers. What you demonstrated to us is ministries.
Yes.
Some of the ministries have more than 3 human beings managing it.
Yes.
Okay. So if you look at that together with the associated costs around that, the savings will actually be more than what you mentioned to us.
That's true.
And the reason we are saying that that is the way to go, it's not like it will save us billions of dollars today, but that is where the future lies. So these gradual savings consistently over a long period of time will begin to free up cash flow for growth enhancing spending. Then that is just that. Then from there, you are looking at state-owned enterprises. You check from 2017, the number of para positions that have been created, deputy CEOs, there, and not, we just can't sustain that. That is clear now. You can tax the air we breathe. With this level of indiscipline with our expenditure, no matter how much revenue you collect, it will not be enough. So I think that instead of government saying, take it or leave it, you're on your own, which perhaps may imply that if you don't sign up for the debt exchange, then default is the logical outcome.
And by the way,
then,
the deputy finance minister was categorical on that. He sat across me and he made the point, if you don't take up, two things will happen to you. Will default, and then you also don't have access to the Financial Stability Fund, which has been created to help those who will be in distress.
Why should this statement come from government?
But isn't that the reality? But that's the realities, you know.
But these were the people who denied the reality long ago. Evans, we are in this mess because the Minister of Finance failed to act on time. This is not the first time Ghana is going to an IMF. We went to IMF in 2014. We made application on August 6, 2014. At that level, inflation was less than 20%. At that time, the level of debt was less than 60%. Our debt was just to be sustainable. And therefore, the 16th IMF program didn't have to take this approach. These people delayed, put their selfish interest ahead of the common interest, delayed. Even 2020, Ghana government failed to subscribe to the debt service suspension initiative because we were choosing Eurobond over that one. Now we've lost both. You don't do all of these things and turn around and say that all the pain must be loaded on somebody's head. And it's still surprising that the Honorable Minister of Finance is still at post. In any serious country, you apologize and resign. Honorable Ken, please, give the country a chance. Give the economy a chance. The pain is too much.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I know Imani has done a lot of work on the sides of government. You've been singing this from the rooftops, SOEs, fiscal recklessness. It doesn't appear that anybody has heard you. So shouldn't we just assume that nothing will change going forward in spite of your 100K you've lost through the haircut?
Well, that's the sad reality. And unfortunately, I'm not too sure that keeping it the way keeping things the way they are or should be would take us out of the doldrums. Something ought to give. And it started with this so-called debt exchange program. All we are asking for is that if you need to show some sincerity in asking everybody else to tighten their belts while you tend to loosen yours. I think that's the fundamental. We need to start from that fundamental point. That if you're asking us who were not party to the debt iceberg that you have created, the only way to have a thawing of the iceberg is for you to also be seen to be, melting, having sunshine over some as part of the iceberg ring. So I'm not too sure we've reached a point where you say you are no longer going to listen. I think essentially what it is how you are listening and how you're actually going to practicalize what you've heard, and that's where we are at. I've been hearing, the reports I'm hearing from the meetings that are going on doesn't seem to suggest to me that the government seems to be quite serious at all in dealing with the urgent issues, because we are going to be in this quagmire for the next 8 years, if not 10. And I don't see any ray of hope on the horizon, given the way we are behaving already. There was a bit of insincerity in the way the whole communication between the committee that was set up to look into this debt exchange and the way announcements were made almost immediately because some aspect of the deal had been leaked to the public. So it doesn't evoke some sense of seriousness. And on hindsight, I now understand why a good friend of mine who is part of this call possibly was not part of the committee. You don't evoke a sense of seriousness. As we speak, I'm told that there's some invitation that has been extended to CSOs to come and do exactly what I don't know at this 11th hour. Nobody knows what they
is it
want
by
to
the
come and
finance?
do.
Is it by the finance ministry?
By the finance ministry. So there's some suggestion that, well, maybe this is just going to be window dressing. Possibly we shouldn't show up. I haven't received any letter, by the way, but colleagues who have received it are not necessarily going to turn up. So because it looks as if there isn't any serious, I don't know, for lack of a better term, there's no urgency. But I characterize it as a mixture of confusion and then possibly what's the word? I've forgotten the second word I wanted to use. But there's clear confusion, and it looks as if pride is what we are trying to pummel through in order to get that thing. Pride doesn't take place in this instance. I mean, what ought to happen is a breath of fresh air. And even if Professor Buckley's wish that the finance minister should go may not necessarily instill the fresh air, we need a fresh sense of urgency. And I think that is what is lacking at this juncture.
Yeah, I mean, how urgent can it be when you have a situation where you have a debt exchange program that has been announced, you've announced a default in technically, and in fact, today I saw the finance ministry's Q&A details of the debt exchange, and then I have a deadline for institutional investors to sign on. They have 12 days left to sign on, and if I don't know if you saw that, Franklin. The 12 days, it expires on 19th of December.
Yeah, part of all of this was also because we took too long to go to the IMF. I recall Prof. Boppin and a host of us were saying, let's get to the IMF in time. You see, if we don't get these things done in record time, you're likely to face a Sri Lankan situation where initially the IMF had to say, look, we are not going to give you a deal until a proper debt restructuring program has come to pass. And that took a lot of time before they finally got a deal out of the IMF. We seem to be doing the witch's dance, 2 steps forwards and 3 steps backwards. And I'm saying that if you look at the whole gamut of operations and even the communications, the body language of the actors in the space from the government side does not evoke any sense of urgency. It's all despondency and confusion. It's a mixture, a mismatch of just clear contradictions. And the more we keep doing this thing, the more we delay. Well, thankfully, on December 14th, Imani and ASEP are putting together a program we call the Debt Armageddon. We are bringing the chief advisor to the Sri Lankan government on debt restructuring, debt issues, as well as the Eurasia Africa director to come and share experiences of how Sri Lanka went through its debt issues, but for it to get an IMF program. And we'll be inviting you, the media, as well as everybody else to be part of that conversation.
And that would be very useful indeed, because Sri Lanka had been there. They've been to the worst of it.
Yeah, they've been through the worst of it. And maybe that's our only contribution to this quagmire of confusion. In fact, there's a lot of comedy of errors, really. And it doesn't seem to be abating at all. It's a real worry.
I mean,
critically is the conversation about the cut that ought to happen. As I said, I was expecting the president to announce that, look, like you indicated, what's it called? An amalgamation of certain ministries. What's the Ministry of Railway? Who does that? And to think that the railway sector generated less than probably 100,000 US dollars as of September. What exactly are we having a railway ministry for? I tend to look at some of the indicators for what's it called, the internally generated funds from a number of government institutions. Look at Efra Sutherland Addict Park generating just about 5,000 US dollars as of September 2022. In fact, Gratis, which is supposed to be the nerve center of small SME-based, industrial-based small and medium enterprises, has barely raked in almost 200,000 Ghana cedis out of a projected value of about 400,000 cedis. You know, what are we doing? I mean, Hot Cast, which is supposed to be the nerve center of our tourism when it comes to the creatives in terms of our culinary activities, has generated not less than $2,000 in as we
Wow.
speak.
And I'm sure they have a significant
So,
staff, huge staff numbers there.
well, the problem is not the issue about the staff. It's the fact that even the low-hanging fruits, where we are supposed to be generating enormous revenue from, have
You
been
know.
left to
Yeah.
rot. And
Franklin,
it's a real worry.
Franklin, thanks for joining me. And quickly to Frank. Frank, have you received, Jessica, have you received an invitation for a meeting, for engagement post the announcement at all? Just curious to check.
No, Evans, we haven't received any invitation at all. But let me say that quickly. I think that Franklin said there is a lot of chaos, but let me tell him that within the chaos there is order. Because if you look at the chaotic situation we find ourselves in, clearly government has a plan, and the plan is that they are decapitating pensions, and the plan is that they are making public sector workers worse off. If you look at current salary negotiations that is ongoing, you will notice that government is now proposing 18%. Already there is a COLA of 15%, which is going to go up come December, at the end of December. That is exactly this month. So in January, all public sector workers are going to be worse off by at least 15%. So if you are
Frank,
giving 18%, technically, it means that you have been given only 3% increment in salary for the year 2023. And inflation at this moment is about 40%. So there is some degree of order in this chaos that we see. They have a plan. Their plan is that they will save themselves. However, all others are supposed to be sacrificed. And that is the plan.
Yeah.
that is not order. That is organized chaos, actually.
No, but that is chaos. There is order in the chaos.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much, gentlemen. Prof, I'm grateful. Dr. Frank Sriboy and Franklin Kuju, I'm grateful. Listen, we'll keep returning to this conversation because it's the biggest one of our lives. I don't think that we'll possibly, well, hopefully we should never see this again. So we'll keep talking about it, giving you the facts so you can be informed and make your own decisions. Enjoy the rest of your evening.